Okay, we're recording. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
So thank you,
Dandava.
Sanaka Rsi Prabhu, for agreeing to have the first of what might be a series of conversations about progressing the child protection agenda within ISKCON. You've been campaigning tirelessly for a number of years. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, for those who may not know much about you?
Hare Krishna Damodara Prabhu. I was born in Italy. When I was 5 years old, my parents moved into the temple. They shortly after they got initiated by Bhagavan, and when they got initiated, I also got a spiritual name, which is Sanaka Rsi, but I never actually had a formal initiation. From the time when I was 5 up until the age of 15, 16, I was in Gurukul. First in Italy and then in Vrindavan, India. And for a short period, I was also in Mayapur, in the Gurukul in Mayapur. As growing up, there were challenges. It was ISKCON, at least from what I knew, ISKCON was very unaware of the Gurukul was very much an experiment, and as with any experiment, a lot of mistakes were made, and a lot of as a consequence of that, of these mistakes, oversights, countless children which were in these gurukuls suffered, and some of them suffered extreme devastation in their lives that carried them throughout their lives. Many have managed to bring them to become functional in society, but many haven't. Many have suffered from substance abuse. Some have committed suicide. It's been like the effects have been quite devastating. When at some point I realized that these same problems that I had suffered and experienced as a child were still things hadn't changed. And it's like you have a model that causes suffering and devastates life, and you're continuing to replicate that model. That's what I saw, and to me that was a concern, because I knew that the model wasn't working first, and what concerned me even more is that I was also aware of the fact that many of the people who were running education in ISKCON hadn't changed. They also had firsthand experience that their model wasn't working, but there was no effort to try and change that. So I did what I could I made an effort.
Yeah, well, a heroic effort. I think a lot of people have seen your couple of films, Cost of Silence films, and I was just talking to some devotees who work in CPO yesterday. They said it had an enormous effect, a positive effect, particularly the first film, on ISKCON's leaders, that people started to wake up a little bit, perhaps to the extent of the problem, the kind of impacts it has on people's lives. Of course, they were fairly intense as movies. What do you sense has been the impact of the awareness that you've created so far, and the extent to which you've mobilized actions?
It's really difficult to quantify the impact. I've had personal letters from devotees. Some were very upset and disturbed, and they told me that I would certainly burn in hell for the rest of eternity for the offenses which and some were very appreciative, fortunately. Some devotees, yes, I had some really touching letters of gratitude and appreciation. And it's like somehow I'm not quite clear how, but somehow it really touched certain devotees. So that's the individual impact. The collective impact is harder to quantify. I mean, you never hear of the children that don't get abused. So you can't count how many children didn't get it. It's hard enough to count the ones that did get abused. But the ones that don't, you certainly can't quantify how many didn't. But I think with regards to raising awareness, it's had a strong impact. With regards to changing the root, what I see as the root cause of the problem, that's slow. The progress on that is slow.
In my own observation,
meaning that what I see as the root cause of the problem is not this teacher or this GBC or that minister of education that is not doing whatever. What I see as the root cause of the problem is the collective human consciousness that is prone to abuse, but also tolerant of abuse. We live in a very abusive environment. You know, from the devotee perspective, it's the material world. Everybody's getting abused. So we also have a very high tolerance for it. So then a lot of devotees would say things like, yeah, but I got it worse when I was a kid. It's like, okay, fine. Just because you got it worse, it doesn't mean that we need to abuse people less, and it's okay. Anyhow.
Yeah, the nature of the subject, of course, it creates massive discomfort, and some people deal with that in different ways. Some people go straight into denial. Some people attack you for making them feel uncomfortable, or they're okay if you're talking about the principle. I mean, who's going to say that there shouldn't be child protection? But then they become protective, maybe if it's someone that they're fond of that seems to be in the firing line or is accused of some kind of deviation. My sense is the coolies themselves, people who are victims, really felt that finally they had a voice that people had to listen to. And I think that was a really, really important thing. I've heard certainly through the grapevine that it triggered that if there had been some people who were relaxed with some of implementing some of the strictures that the CPO had recommended, that this triggered that those strictures certainly begun to be observed. I think that's a really good thing. I mean, I was probably someone who gave you mixed reaction because I absolutely support the cause of child protection, but I did wonder sometimes if maybe the tone of the documentary possibly rubbed some of the people we might want to influence the wrong way. I think I have changed. You were going to ask me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, our exchange, I think everybody knows you as a committed ISKCON loyalist. I don't think anybody can question that. And over the years, we've had several cyber exchanges where we've shared our different opinions, sometimes in very animated ways, particularly about the leadership's involvement. My view has always been, not always, but at least since I would say 2006, 2007, my views has been without any doubt that the GBC is aware of the problem, has been aware of the problem for a long time, and not only do they not take action to address the problem, but they reinforce with their they endorse the environment and the situations and the policies that perpetuate the problem. That's always been my position, and your position was very different. It was hard for you to fathom that, I think, but I get this sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there has been a shift. So I'm wondering what's happened for you.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, for those who don't know me, Damodara Das, I also grew up in a family of devotees, so got very early exposure to Krishna consciousness. Lots of different kinds of services in the 30-something years I've been involved with the society. I think I moved in September '84 as a brahmachari, but I even visited in 1975 as a young kid. I've done various services, including leadership services, including that would have, when I was at the Manor, included being the head of the Gurukul there, although I didn't actually do any classroom teaching and my involvement was quite minimal, just governance. I think I have always been very concerned. I'm married to a coolie who went to a Gurukul and had some traumatic experiences, have some of my own experiences as a kid. I've always been concerned that there's several stages I think that our society needs to look at. Does it have everything in place for adequate prevention? That anyone who's coming into contact with the kids has had a background check and so on. I'm assured actually that those kind of policies exist. I don't know to what extent they're properly enforced or supervised, inspected. And maybe it varies from one place to another. I get a sense that there's a decentralized governance, and that may leave individual GBC secretaries to apply policies as per their own subjective idea of how important they are. Another factor then is, are the CPO properly funded? I gather that's not the case, and that is problematic because I think our society should prioritize the protection of children, the passing of Krishna consciousness on to the next generation. As you say, if there's been abuse, this is terrible trauma for anyone to deal with. It estranges people from Krishna consciousness. And until recently, maybe the academic performance of Gurukuls also didn't really prepare people for life. So that was also, I think, a short change. When abuse has taken place, not only does there need to be thorough investigation, and I gather now in most places around the world, there's quite a, if underfunded, but still quite capable and experienced and qualified investigators in the Child Protection Office. But when they come up with a resolution, that, you know, this such and such is an offender and these are the restrictions that should be applied, the extent to which the leaders then observe those recommendations and follow those strictures, that seems to have been disappointing. And that's certainly the thing that I think has concerned me even in recent days. And then, of course, there's victim support, you know, to what extent there's adequate support for people who've gone through trauma. I feel until ISKCON's got an absolute world-class system in all of those areas, it has much to do. So I think, yeah, I think I've always seen it as more about incompetence than ill will. But I'm also, I think one of the things that has changed for me is I'm aware of just how much mateship there is. Mateship's pretty much an Australian word, but it means people coming to the aid of their friends and either campaigning for lesser strictures or just not following those strictures. And to me, that's just horrible. It's horrible for victims. It sends exactly the wrong signal to everybody. Obviously, it's terrible for the reputation of society, and the society's leaders, I think, are judged to be in deficit of their responsibilities, just about by the whole devotee population around the planet. And even in the last few days, I was trying to explore what's the way forward, because you and I have talked about this a few times. And I think in the past, maybe we disagreed around tactics. I thought maybe a more conciliatory approach. And maybe that's one of the things that is changing for me, because I'm assuming that people will respond to something that's just well reasoned and so on. And I'm less convinced of that now. But I think both of us are scratching our heads. And maybe this is the kind of thing we can invite people's comments and have other interviewees on future days. What is the best way to proceed? Because I hear that particularly cost of silence, number one, was really, really well received and actually triggered some mobilization, but clearly there's a long, long way to go. And so I definitely like to think, I mean, I know you've had recent insights maybe about there could be a different way to approach this, or at least maybe your previous approach didn't work out. I don't know how much you want to say about that. I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, I'm. It's already done. I wrote. in February, I wrote a letter of apology where I apologized for the because through the course of the when I decided that I was going to embark on this, especially the videos before they came out, I was very aware that it was going to upset a lot of people, and my hope was that, and offend a lot of devotees, and my hope was that the benefit would justify and outweigh the consequences, and I may not know whether they did, but I was always aware that that it was a very risky hand to play. The reason why I went ahead is because I felt that regardless of the risk, something had to be done. And I have made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of people have suffered, and I am really I do feel sorry for the suffering that I have caused people. And at the same time, it's a very difficult apology because I still think that we need greater efforts for child protection. It's nowhere near done. It's nowhere near acceptable, the standard of child protection. So how do you tell someone who's a spiritual leader of a society that his policies and stance on child protection is abusing children in a way that is respectful and be heard? A private letter, it's not. It's like, if it was a lack of awareness, then I write them a letter and say, look, what you're doing is hurting children, and be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Let me do something about it. That's terrible. But they're very aware of it, so it's not a lack of awareness. Now, one thing that for me came out that I realized from the video is that it's not just the leaders. There is the leaders. They would respond to social pressure. There is also, we live in a society where we're bombarded with information about the most horrible things that happen all over the world, and there is this
desensitization.
Yes, that's a good word. About towards abuse, and it's like, oh, a lot of people say, oh, but it's the kids in India. That's a different planet. And yeah, it's a different planet. But it's still.
What we're saying, they matter less or something?
Yeah,
that would be a horrendous attitude.
I don't think they say they matter less. I think people have less. They feel that it's out of their sphere of influence. They say, what can you do? That's India. Kind of like giving up. And things are different in India. And there is but it's not just India. Russia has a huge problem. Russia has a huge problem with domestic abuse, and there is a very there's a lot of studies that have been done on the correlations between domestic abuse and child abuse. So the devotees community in Russia has a huge problem with domestic abuse, which now we don't have, ISKCON doesn't have a child protection representative that has gone to Russia to date. They don't have they get $10,000 a year from the GBC. So we don't have to run the international, that's their annual budget allowance from the GBC. Nobody's ever gone to Russia from the CPO. There is schools that they just found out recently, ISKCON schools that the CPO just found out last year or the year before that they even exist, and they've been going for 20 years. I expect that in the coming 20 years, we're going to find out that there is abuse that's taking place today in Russia, in South America, and in Africa. I don't know if they have schools in China, but I know that they have schools in India. And besides Vrindavan and Mayapur are just the flagship schools, the ones that are right in everybody's face. And there's so much abuse that has taken place, and in some instances it still is taking place today. And those are in everybody's face. This gives you an idea of what's happening in the schools that are not monitored. Are not supervised.
So there could still be just widespread abuse for which there's no mechanisms in place to either prevent, respond, help the victims.
But I think it comes to I think some people would like, a lot of people have contacted me and say, well, what can we do? How do we support? And I really don't know, because how do you fix a problem like this? It's a problem of collective consciousness. So in that sense, you need a spiritual solution. I do think that giving money to the Child Protection Office, for the first time ever, we have a Child Protection Office that works with the GBCs, but also takes a strong stance for child protection. That's unprecedented in the history of ISKCON. Even when Dear Govinda was director, he had sometimes challenging relationship with the GBCs. So that may have made things difficult for him in some ways. And it's never easy to confront the GBCs and tell them, you can't have this guy. But anyway, in that sense, we're very fortunate right now. And I think that if we can fund the CPO, it would go a long way. It's a good place to start.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a few devotees around the world, I don't know how many all up, who are doing an amazing job considering they are so resource constrained. And they're definitely creating that much more awareness, providing proper investigations and so on. I know there's still tensions around those. It does strike me that one of the biggest challenges in ISKCON is not unique. It seems to be common to a lot of religious organizations that there's this misplaced sympathy towards an offender. He often has a relationship, say he, could be she, but yeah, they often have a relationship with one of the leaders on the GBC, and the GBC often seems to be a little queasy about dealing with someone that's so close. I don't have data here to say, look, it's absolutely this way. That's just the sense I get. And I don't think that's different than, say, the Catholic Church or other organizations, this idea of how can this holy person that I know and I'm fond of possibly be guilty of these things? Give him another chance. And it just sends such a horrible message to everybody. It's just wrong.
It does. We don't have, there's no clarity on the stance our leaders take on the issue of child protection. And that's very confusing to a lot of people. Are you still there, Damodar?
Yeah, I just had some little notice coming on that we've removed the 40-minute time limit on our next group meeting. Okay, I don't know what that means about this group meeting.
It says it is still recording.
Yeah, okay. So we might have a little while left, but at some point we'll get a hurry up. But we do see this as potentially part of the series, and I think we're conversing, I'm going to let you come back on in a moment, but we're conversing with a view to triggering the conversation with others as well. And so there might be other people who join subsequent calls to figure out the way forward. But sorry, I interrupted you. Please resume.
I find I'm always shocked, and I don't even know how to explain this in a way that somebody's not going to get offended, but I'm always shocked by the inconsistency that there is between ISKCON stance on Ritviks and their stance on child abusers. So if a Ritvik comes to the temple, the guy and everybody knows what to do. There is no ambiguity. There is no. There is a clear stance, and it's very effective. The guy's out. If a child abuser comes to the temple, it's like, oh no, but are you not going to give him an opportunity for service? You don't hear any of that rhetoric, excuses, and things when it comes to Ritviks. And it's like, how is it that we live in a society that regards Ritviks as a greater threat than child abusers? What is the madness behind that? To me, it just doesn't make any sense. But also, it tells me that the society has the ability to respond if it's prioritized enough. So somehow we have prioritized the threat, the perceived threat of the Ritviks as being greater than the threat posed by a child abuser, which is completely insane. Why do we do? I don't know. It's just puzzling to look at the two issues. And in saying this, I'm not. It's not in any way a judgment on the Ritviks, and I definitely don't want to get into that conversation. But it's just observing how the society has the ability to respond very effectively to the perceived threat, but it's intentionally, willfully not. Child abusers are not seen as a threat. Children are not seen as protecting children is not seen as a priority. And that's puzzling to me.
Well, especially because they're one of the 5 protected or to be protected living entities, you know, along with cows, women, Brahmins, old people. So children it's our religious duty. And even if we just think sensibly, much fewer people are going to join through conversion than will actually be born in the society. If we don't figure out how to raise them nicely, prepare them for a productive life in the world, as well as having a healthy appetite for Krishna consciousness, then it's a massive fail, and it's way short of what Prabhupada intended the experience of future generations to be.
But also without trying to say that Gurukulis are special, this and that and the other. I firmly believe that the potential of a Gurukuli is far greater, potentially speaking, than a person that joins at 20, 30. The potentiality is much greater.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, we have those verses in Shastra about you should be receiving this from the very beginning of life. Even, Prabhupada got into before conception and so on. So everything's meant to be in place. If someone does take birth in a family of devotees, that's supposed to be such an auspicious birth to give someone a chance. Whereas if they're coming into a world that essentially is a little unsafe, neglectful, violent, or whatever, that's just too shocking. We hear about,
It is, but what's the priority also of a society?
Exactly.
It's like, we're here to teach you about God, but we abuse our kids and we don't care about them. What's the value of a society that doesn't take it like?
Well, looks like you're frozen. I hope that we're still catching you somehow. Hopefully you'll be back. Yeah. What is the point of converting people and neglecting the children?
But also, if
we lost you there for a moment, so I'm not sure what else you said.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can definitely hear you now.
I was saying that if you look at a society that is going to teach you about God, but they don't even have enough compassion and to protect their own children, it's like you have to question what are the values, what is the substance of the society, and this is not a criticism, but it's to encourage I'm trying to encourage to raise the standards of child protection. That's my objective. What else?
Yeah, as you say, we're trying to strive for the highest form of love, and yet if we are missing some of the immediate love that needs to be given, that's all children need is love. And obviously, it's such a violation of that contract to also not be able to deal with it responsibly when these ugly things happen is a fail of massive proportions.
Yeah, and it all comes down to priorities. What is the value that the Hare Krishnas as a society place on their children? It really comes down to that. So because it's not a lack of resources, we keep building temples, and we've got, so it's kind of like if I told you, Damodar, your daughter is in trouble, and you're like, no, but I can't help her. I got to build this house. Like, what do you need a house for? Your daughter is in trouble. You need to revise your priorities. And I think the society needs that. It's like, why are we spending so much money on building temples, which is a great thing, building more temples, but why are we not dedicating a fraction of that to protecting our children? What is the value of these temples? Who's going to run these temples?
Well, dare I say, a temple can easily become a vanity project for the person who's seen to be the establisher of that temple. And that's not to say that is people's motivations. I would make no such claim, but we should also consider how things could be seen. It could also be seen that, you know, having a convert who becomes an adoring disciple is a much easier population to cater for than someone who's grown up, especially if they've grown up slightly out of kilter, slightly, you know, we're slightly messed up around their impressions of Krishna consciousness because of these kind of things. But that would be an act of love. An act of love is not simply to attend to the adoring follower immediately, but is also to minister to those who've grown up.
For sure. But also I think you're, how do you say, you're going to get a lot more value from the person that criticizes you and not from the person that adores you.
That's right.
If I just tell you, Damodar, you're great, you're perfect, you don't need to change anything, what value does that really offer to you? If I tell you, Damodar, there's this, and this, these areas you could improve, they're problematic, okay, it's going to be harder to hear that, but it's more valuable. If I just tell you how great you are, it doesn't give you any external perspective on how to improve and move forward.
So look, I'm really mindful that I'm not sure how long Zoom's going to give us before it cuts us off. I've got no warnings of yet, so I'm hoping we're still recording. But I'm mindful that we'll probably want to serialize this. And I think a lot of us initially having this conversation, the idea behind this conversation is, let's have a frequent conversation. Cost of Silence films created massive awareness at the time. But if we release a conversation that's progressing this agenda forward on a regular basis, whether that's a conversation between us, whether there are victims who might want to, you know, express their perceptions, whether there's leaders who might want to come on and talk about it from their perspective, whether the CPO personnel, devotees that, you know, perform those services. I think the conversation needs to go on until it actually does result in the mobilizing of action. Awareness and action. Anything short of those requisite actions, in my view, there's still this massive deficit, and it really damages the moral authority of the organization and the leadership. So I don't know if you have any final thoughts. Obviously, this is our first experiment. We're hoping that Zoom's recorded it and we can look at it and send it out. And hopefully it will also inspire comments and other people who might want to join in on the conversation, such that...
I think it's a good start. It's a very vast topic, and it's hard to organize it sometimes. But I definitely, one of the things that I struggled with after the video was, how do I follow up on it? And I think this, let's see, hopefully this is going to be a good follow-up.
Well, let's see. People may take the 45 minutes or whatever it is to watch the clip, and maybe they'll comment. Maybe people will also volunteer to be part of future conversations. I'd like to hope that we can involve all the powers that be in the conversation. Obviously, it depends whether they consider it, as you say, a sufficient a priority. But it would seem strange if the conversation was taking place without their involvement. That to me is just bizarre land.
Well, I think I think what we can do is invite them, and then
exactly
at least some people, and then it's up to them whether they want to participate or not.
Well, look, Sanaka, thank you for taking the time to join the call and being as open. And I feel very encouraged that although we perhaps came at this from really different angles for a while, that in terms of finding a way forward, we both feel hugely committed to finding the way to take this to the next step and get this across the line.
I think through divine guidance and grace, even this is possible. I'm firmly convinced of that. Haribol Prabhuji, thank you.
Krishna, I'll look for the file and I'll send it to you, and then we can decide whether or not we send it out to everyone.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank
Haribol.
you. Haribol.